episode of Questions For. Questions For is a podcast that aims to interview high-performance athletes, coaches, and prominent people within the sporting world, with the aim to learn about their lives and experiences. This first episode is brought to you by mentormatched.ca. Mentor Match is an interactive online platform designed to help emerging athletes to learn from high-performance coaches and athlete mentors, such as U.S. Olympic swim coach David Marsh. All listeners of the podcast receive $10 off using the code PODCAST typed in on the website. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the first episode of Questions For. Today, our guest is Mel Stewart, or more commonly known as Gold Medal Mel. He is a former professional swimmer, multiple Olympic gold medalist, former world record holder, and he is the co-founder of SwimSwam, the world's leading swimming news website. Welcome, Mel, to the podcast. How's it going?
Good to be here. We're going to talk about swimming and swim business and everything that I love.
That's what we like to hear. All right. So I'm going to start off with your swimming career. And specifically, I want to start off with 1987 to 1988. You know, from what I could tell, that was your first medal on a national stage, the Pan Pacific, and then your first Olympic Games, correct?
My first international competition representing Team USA was in Moscow. At the Goodwill Games. And a lot of people forget that because we're talking about the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So we all watch CNN, right?
Yeah.
CNN News. CNN's a global news network. CNN was TBS, TNT. It's this massive media company. And coming off the 1980 Olympics and the United States boycott, we boycotted because of President Carter boycotted the Olympic Games, and we didn't go to the Olympics in Moscow. Ted Turner, the owner of CNN, the founder of CNN, TBS, TNT, he wanted to work through sports to bring the Soviet Union, now Russia, and the United States closer together. So he created the Goodwill Games. The first Goodwill Games was 1986. And I made the U.S. national team that summer and went. I was 17 years old. And we stayed in a hotel overlooking Red Square. Chernobyl, I don't know if anybody knows what Chernobyl is, but Chernobyl happened. It was a meltdown of that reactor. So they had this huge situation happen. So we couldn't eat vegetables. We couldn't eat all these different foods. So I was living on granola bars, dried meat, and fruit juice with like 100 grams of sugar per bottle. I don't want to get too detailed, but long story short is that I didn't use the restroom. I didn't have a personal moment in the bathroom for like 14 days and raced that way. And I thought I was going to die. But the happy ending was that I won my first international meet, got a gold medal, and did it in Russia when it was still communist, when it was the Soviet Union.
Under those conditions.
Under those conditions. And it was, I was just a kid. I was the youngest guy on the team and probably annoyed everyone to death. But it was, it's when you represent your country, it's a special moment. So it was a nice start.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good way to start off your swim career in a definitely interesting way, especially going into the rest of your career. Like, conditions must have not been worse than that condition right there, eating dried meat and granola bars for the days leading up to your first international competition.
Back in the 1980s, I did not consider diet at all. I grew up in North Carolina. No one from my family had ever gone to college. Few had graduated high school. My family comes from the Appalachian Mountains, and there were generations that didn't have jobs. They lived off the land, and they moved down to the Piedmont of North Carolina and followed the mill jobs. They moved to a place called Gastonia, and worked in Firestone Mill. And my dad was, so we were very, very blue collar. We were either lower class or poverty line. And my dad worked the third shift at a trucking company. And he told everybody he was a truck driver. And in our family, him being a truck driver, he was like King Daddy. He was the socioeconomically the highest person on the rung. And my mother would whisper to me, your dad doesn't, he drives a truck locally. He really loads freight. Trying to be an elite athlete and being the best that you can possibly be, whether you're 10 years old or you're 26 years old. It's about creating habits. And I was creating habits, but not in all areas of my life.
Yeah, going off track just a little bit, I remember my brother was telling me about a famous Canadian swimmer. I can't remember their name off the top of my head right now. But on the topic of habits, he said that going into every Saturday, or I think it was Wednesday, before leading up to his Olympic Games, his coach would always do something fun on Saturday, and they would never do swimming. And then as soon as it came to that race day, because they knew that I think it was the 200 breast would land on that Wednesday. And when it came to Wednesday of his Olympic day, he was ready to go because he knew it was going to be fun. And it's just interesting how people develop habits similar to that.
You wonder with coaches how controlled they are, and that they're controlling you, and they're creating an environment that you're going to react to. And it's so that sounds brilliant to me.
Mm-hmm.
So to make a Wednesday, your Olympic day, looking off into the future, a happy day, a day when your endorphins and your serotonin are automatically going to spike because it just happens to be a Wednesday. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, no, it was really cool because he said that he would always come to the pool, and then they wouldn't swim. They would go bowling or maybe go watch a movie, but it was just he would always plan something for that day. So I always found that really interesting.
We would do, I had a coach, and the coach would randomly stop us, and we'd come into practice, and we might be tired, or we're just into the grind. We've gone for 3 or 4 weeks, and it's been hard. And I've always had coaches that pushed us. Because in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, there was still this concept that you had to swim 100,000 meters a week. At a certain point, it's like a pressure cooker. You've got to let some steam off. Mm-hmm. And randomly, the coach would just say, "Today we're not going to swim. We're going to do battle ball." And battle ball is this souped up version of water polo that basically involves fighting.
All right.
So much fun. And we would do it for 2 hours. We would tread out water you had to tread water the entire time. We'd tread water for an hour, take a break for 5 minutes, use the restroom, tread water for another hour. Just trying to get your ball in the hole in between fights. And loved it. So once again, I come back to David Marsh. David Marsh is the kind of guy who did fun stuff like that also.
Yeah.
And I had it when I was younger. I was lucky enough to have it when I was younger, and I was lucky enough to have it when I was an elite.
So I guess we'll make a quick transition onto my next question, which would be, going into your first Olympics, where were you at? So you're this boy with Southern California, you're only eating, let's say, fried food. And how was it being at your first games?
In 1988, the Olympics were in Seoul, South Korea. And I was 19, and I was the second youngest guy on the team. Still very, very immature, and we've already talked about my diet, bad diet. I was ranked second in the world in the 200 butterfly. I was a 158.8, and I was 1/10 off the American record in the 200 butterfly, but I was the top American, second in the world. I was second in the world to a guy by the name of Michael Gross from Germany. And Michael Gross was called the Albatross, and he was the greatest butterflyer of that era. 6'9" with a wingspan of 7 feet, and that's why he had the nickname the Albatross. And I had never raced him before, but I was convinced that I'd been I've been dropping time year over year, and I was young and he was older. I was convinced that I was going to beat him. I lived inside my head the Olympic year, probably starting 1987 fall, all the way up to the Olympic Games, and I freaked out. I was so I literally fried my brain, and this is the way I would describe it. I went into the waiting room. There were 6 other swimmers in the waiting room. The albatross wasn't there yet, and everybody was tense. And this one swimmer sat in the corner, and I don't know who it is, but he sat in the corner and he was sniveling. And I'm like, he's sniveling. His nose must be running. I don't know what's going on. And then it was very clear that he was in tears. So he was freaking out. So I started freaking out. And then the albatross, Mikhail Gross, walked in, and he didn't look at anybody. He was an elite. He was a pro. He had been to the show. He knew what was going on. And he was focused on his race. And I remember he never looked at us, and then we started to parade out to the blocks. And I remember not feeling numb from my waist down, and I couldn't feel my feet on the deck, and I was freaking out because I couldn't feel my feet on the deck, and I just felt my energy drain from me. And it was fear. It was fear. And I remember swimming and just not feeling anything. I had no mind-body connection. And long story short, I got 5th place. So I was ranked 2nd in the world, and I got 5th place. And I swam a time that was almost as slow. I was 19. That was almost as slow as the time I'd swum 2.5 years earlier. So I remember I was the last one out of the pool. And I was hanging on to the side thinking to myself, it's 4 more years. I have 4 more years. I have to live with this moment that I've experienced for 4 years. And it really did a number on me.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. I see athletes go through this. I see what happens, and it just seems so. I have a lot of compassion for them because it's hard to come back from. So when it's easy when you win and you're winning, because something happens to your brain. It's like you just get it in your head. You're going to perform well and you're going to win, or you're going to perform well, not win, but you're going to be close to your times or improving your times. But when you have a moment where you just eat it, it's soul crushing. So when athletes come back from that, that tells me a lot about their character. But that's where I was, and that's my 1988 experience.
That waiting room sounds like it would have been quite intense, especially going into your first games and walking in and seeing somebody crying. That would have set anybody off.
I was so immature. I was such a child. We went to a training camp in Hawaii, and we went to a place called Sandy Beach. And we were tapering, so we had all kinds of energy. And there were a lot of kids out there, and they were local, and they were boogie board, body surfing. And it was like 10-foot breakers, and these breakers would break right onto the shore. And that's why it was called Sandy Beach. And these kids were out there, and they were wearing short fins, and they were locals or fins. And I'm like, I'm an Olympian, I can do this. I went out. We're in the training camp for the 1988 Olympic team. I go out in the water, and I swear to you, I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to drown. I really did. I barely made it back in. I got thrown onto that beach, bruised up. My judgment was really off. At the same training camp, I'm rooming with the youngest guy on the team, named Lars Jorgensen, who's now the head coach at the University of Kentucky. And depending on who you talk to me or you talk to him, the story might have a slight variation. But we were kids, and we were throwing toilet paper bombs out over the railing of the top floor of this hotel from our room. And we were just being silly. We were kids. We had so much energy because we were doing like 2,000 meters a day on taper. Mm-hmm. And we decided that it would be a smart idea to fill one of those little plastic trash cans full of toilet paper and then put water in that and then dump that over the side. We did it. And it made a toilet paper bomb at the entrance to this hotel that was so massive. I could hear it on the top floor. It landed with a thump. And about 50 yards away, I saw a police officer's car, cruiser go, woo! And then suddenly a lot of people running into the hotel. We jumped into our bed, pulled the covers over our head, turned the lights out, and my heart rate was 200 beats a minute. They came all the way up to our room, knocked on the door, and came in and scared us to death. Basically told us we were off the Olympic team. Now, depending on who you talk to, I cried or Lars cried, but I remember it. Lars cried like a little baby. So I think it's important, and it's a silly story, and it's a true story, but I think it's so very important when you're on the global stage or on the elite stage to be mindful and to live in this, and that you've got to keep your head in the right place. You've got to stay focused, and distractions can be bad. And I think it takes a whole lot of discipline, and I had not learned that discipline yet.
So then I guess going into your second games, you enrolled in University of Tennessee.
That's correct.
And so what happened from, let's say, that stage where you're throwing toilet paper bombs off the top of a hotel to being the world record holder at Tennessee? So what happened, in that span?
It took me about, I think I was clinically depressed for a year. I grew up a lot. Like I remember my mother and father looking at me, and they knew how disappointed I was after the Olympics, and I remember them saying, "You look like you've aged 10 years." And I did. I looked back at photographs, and I looked different. I looked like a little boy, and then suddenly, 3 to 6 months later, I have this worn, serious look on my face. And so I leaned into swimming, and swimming kept me balanced. But something I couldn't shake was the fear. I remember going to U.S. Nationals, and I'd been winning nationals since I was 15 years old. And
you've been coming first at U.S. Nationals since you were 15.
Yeah, I won at 15, and it was because frankly I was lucky. We were a little bit slow in the years that I won. It was also a weird time in history where I would be going to nationals, and all the collegiate athletes would be at NCAAs. So I'm able to make the claim because a lot of people don't know that it's a little bit different now. But back then there was a hole so that if you were young, you could win nationals, and I did. But and once you win over and over, it should become like rote. But so long story short is I barely won U.S. national championships that next summer, and they were in Los Angeles at USC. But I was so afraid on the blocks, ready to swim. It was like having flashbacks. It was like PTSD. And it was just a shaky swim, a difficult swim. And I managed to win, but not by much.
So was it every time you were on a national stage you were getting this fear, or was it, every time you were going up for the 200 fly?
It was every time it was 200 fly on the national stage. 200 fly was my real estate. It was my territory. I'd been so successful in it, because I'd won YMCA nationals, U.S. junior nationals. Then I started winning nationals over and over. Mm-hmm. And so it was every time it was a national championship or an international competition, I was scared to death. We went to the Pan Pacific Games. They're Pan Pacific Championships now, but Pan Pacific Games. So I went to the Pan Pacific Championships in '89, and again, barely won. It was one of the most painful races in the world. I got tired of being afraid, and I got tired of feeling pain, almost angry with myself, and just mad. And I had a mentor who looked at me, and this was as a gentleman who I went to a boarding school in high school, and my parents didn't have a lot of money, so he paid for my tuition. Sweet, kind dude, married to the same lady for 50 years. And so he's just somebody who paid for my education and boarding school. And he had always stayed in touch. So after the Olympics and after that post-Olympic year and spending a year depressed, he looked at me at one point and he said, "You know what? You need to be specific about what you want, and you need to get focused on that, and everything needs to flow through that vision." And he goes, write it down. So I did. I wrote it down, and I wrote this down. I will swim 155.8 in the 200-meter butterfly, and I will swim this race January of 1991 at World Championships, and I will win and retire Michael Gross. And that was what I wrote. And I put it on my medicine cabinet, the back side of it. You know, there's a mirror on the front of our medicine cabinet in my dorm room, and I put it on the back side of that so I could open my medicine cabinet and read it every morning before practice. And it was odd because I really got into it. I would wake up in the morning, and when my feet hit the floor, it became a routine. My feet would hit the floor, and I would say, "Today is the day." And today is another day and another step toward being the world champion and the greatest 200 butterflyer in history. And that was going through my head. And I would walk to my medicine cabinet, open it up, and read my note to myself. At one point in time, that note was gone, and I didn't know why. And we had dorm rooms where people would flow in and out, and so I figured maybe it fell out, but who knows what happened to it. So I wrote it again and put it back up there. The day I lost it, I went down to the pool deck, and one of my teammates, as I walked into our team room, said, "Everybody, it's Melvin Stewart." I wasn't Mel Stewart. People call me Melvin in the South. It's Melvin Stewart, the new world record holder in the 200 butterfly, going 155.80. Well, the world record was Gross's, and it was a 156.2, and that was 4/10 faster. And everyone, it was kind of I'm sure it came across very arrogantly, and everyone laughed. Everyone laughed at me. But and that hurt a lot. But it was it made my resolve that much stronger. And there were certain times over that year where I was doing 10,000 meters of butterfly a day. Often that was a Tuesday or a Thursday, depending on where I was in the training cycle. And so on the lead up to World Championships, I was incredibly fit and strong. And I was so used to pain and so used to the cycle that I was fearless. And I remember walking into the waiting room, and I noticed that Gross walked in, but I didn't look at him. And I didn't look at anybody else. I was just aware. And I remember walking out to the blocks, and this was in Perth, Australia for World Championships. And I remember my feet hitting the ground, and I'm like, I can feel my feet. My feet are connecting. And I'm walking up to the blocks, and I'm like, I'm going to hammer this guy. I'm going to hammer this guy. And we raced, and he led me for 150 meters. And I passed him on the last lap, and I went a 155.69. So I swam a time within 11 100ths of a second of the goal time. And it was 11 100ths of a second faster. So 155.69, no jammer, wearing a ribbed cap and Speedo Sprint goggles. And
2 foot start, you had everything going.
And the no wedge in the block. And 10 minutes later in the press conference, Gross retired. He was very charismatic. He was very charming and very nice. And, we'd never really had a conversation, but he told the media, he goes, I can't swim faster. I can't do 29 4 times in a 50 fly. And Mel Stewart's done this, and he says, I am announcing my retirement.
Did you ever get a chance to speak to him, or the only thing you've had was, that post-conference interview?
That was it. And I've emailed him once since then, and he's like, so we're going to interview him. I will do an interview with him for our magazine, and we'll run that after it appears in the magazine. We'll run it about 4 months later on SwimSwam. But I've always wanted to have a debrief with him. And so he's very responsive, and he's a very nice guy, and I'm looking forward to that being published in the future.
Yeah, that definitely sounds something interesting. I'd want to see that for sure.
I think when I was younger, I don't think I know. I lived in this headspace of I hate my competition, and I swam with a lot of anger, but that wasn't, that you can't hold on to that. Mm-hmm. And I remember feeling like I love this guy in the press conference because one, it was like this understanding of, like, it was so hard to get to that world championship and world record. And it was my first one, and it was I'd just done it once. And this guy had been a world-class athlete since the early 80s. So I just had this flood of emotion and immense respect for him because we have a shared experience. Mm-hmm. When you compete with someone, they should be your best friend, because it's if you have a healthy, balanced relationship, you should love that person, because you're never going to be better than when you're trying to beat them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And but when you're a young guy, you don't always think that way.
It's just not until you look back at it that you kind of realize it, I guess.
I became aware when I was younger. I was aware of what was going on, but it was I had a big chip on my shoulder.
So, going into I guess people you've raced, there was one interesting story that I ran across that I wanted to talk about, and that would be the Pablo Morales story. And I wanted to hear about that. And there's also an aspect of it that I didn't quite understand, and that was jumping the start.
Jumping the start. There are so many stories with Pablo Morales, and I don't know that they're all safe for podcasts. I'm gonna see. I'm wondering if I can explain them. This is what you need to know. The United States boycotted the Olympic Games in 1980, so I didn't have heroes from 1980. And I was 10, 11 years old around that time, about the time when you get heroes in your sport, when you really look up to people. So I lost that opportunity. So my heroes were the Olympians from 1984, the Los Angeles Games, and that included Pablo Morales. But by 1985, 86, 87, I'm racing against the best swimmers in the United States and winning. The first time I saw Pablo was the summer of 86, and he came to race in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Pepsi Open, and it was in a public facility, and it was just a real public facility type place. Bathroom stalls with no doors, steel toilets that are the same steel toilets that are in prison. And so the first time I saw him in person, I walked into the bathroom and he's using the restroom, and my dad walks in and he's like, I'm like washing my hands. My dad walks in, he looks over, he's like, "Hey, what's up, Pedro?" And his name is Pedro Pablo Morales, but it was just coming from my father's Southern roots. He was gleeful and excited to know that Pablo was there, but Pablo was using the restroom. And to understand Pablo is to understand that he would never, ever hurt anyone's feelings. He would never treat you with anything other than absolute respect. So I sensed this and understood this in this awkward moment, because he came out of the bathroom and he walked out and he shook my father's hand after he was done using the restroom. And my point is, it came out of this awkward moment. He shook my father's hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Stewart. Of course I know Melvin, and looking forward to race him." And he always treated me, and he didn't need to, because like I said, chip on my shoulder, fast and loose, a little bit.
Had something to prove.
Yeah, I mean, this kid's in Stanford. He's an Olympic champion, but he always treated me and he treated my father with great respect. So, going back to 1988, I watched Pablo miss the Olympic team. I pushed him off the Olympic team. He didn't perform there. He trained too hard, didn't hit his taper. After being an Olympic champion, a silver medalist individually in the 100 butterfly, gold medalist in the relay. 88 was supposed to be his year, and he didn't make the team. And I remember him, it was in Austin, Texas. I remember him walking away. And I remember his shoulders looked like they were so narrow, and he looked like he just slumped away.
So did you push him off from the 100 fly, or he also competed in the 2?
No, I pushed him off, and he had an opportunity. He was missing his opportunities in each race, and when he swam 200 fly, I made it in the 200 fly, and I think he was third in the 200 fly. Ooh. It was let me just explain that it was such a negative memory in in my head that I pushed it out of my brain. Like that, you have thumbnails in your brain with how you remember things. You have you have an image. And the image that's in my head is him walking out of the facility at the University of Texas and walking past me and smiling this sad smile. And he had this, he had this book bag, like the bag over his shoulders. And his shoulders were hunched up and so narrow. And his head was down and he was just walking away. It was just a walk of defeat. And it was, you don't want those images in your brain. It's negative. Mm-hmm. You don't want to associate with that. I was going off to the Olympics. But it was very, very hard to watch. Pablo came back the year before 1992 and walked on deck, and everybody talks in swimming, so everybody knew what was going on. And I knew that when he walked on deck, and I'd seen him intermittently, on deck at some meets in the stands. Pablo he had to be 40 pounds heavier. Pablo was huge. Pablo looked like a swollen tick. He just looked, he did. He was a Olympic athlete, Olympic frame, hard as a rock. And then, he graduated Stanford, went to law school at Cornell. He was doing some coaching a little bit on the side at Cornell, but he was getting his law degree. And he would show up at a meet every so often, but he was in the background. When he shows up on deck, his mother died, and his mother died in the intervening time, and I think his mother died was life is short. I don't want to miss an opportunity. So he's going back to the Olympic Games. So the rumors that were circulating through the United States and on pool decks was that Pab Load had returned to swim. Ooh. And it was almost a joke. So Pab Load was showing up in his little Speedo on deck at Stanford, and he was going to train with the team, and he was going to get ready for the Olympic Games.
This was 1991 or 19?
It's 91, fall of 91. So he called him Pab Load. And apparently he lost an enormous amount of weight within the first 6 to 8 weeks. And then he goes to the US Open that fall. And slowly but surely he gets faster. And he gets faster and faster and faster. But if you'd guessed at the US Open, it'd be he's not gonna make the Olympic team. I mean, I appreciate that his mother died and that he's coming back and he's a great champion. He's always going to be an Olympic champion, but it's a little bit sad. Mm-hmm. And we reached trials, and I was first at trials 100 fly. He was second. I think Matt Biondi was third. But it was I was going to beat Pablo at the Olympics. I was going to beat Pablo. I was going to beat Pablo, get on the medal stand, the 100 fly. And trials were in February of 92. And what happened between February and the Olympic Games is that Pablo got leaner and harder and faster. It's like he was getting his old man power and strength. And I remember talking to him, and he's like, Mel, he goes, I'm trying to hold my speed down that first 50 because it's too much. I'll burn up too much, which is I didn't understand that because I was a kid who swam 400 IM, the mile, and 200 fly. I could go out in the 200 fly in a 55. But if I swam the 100 fly going as fast as I possibly could, I'd be a 53.9, 54 low. But Pablo was the exact opposite type of animal. And it occurred to me about midway through that season on the run up to the Olympic Games in Barcelona, Spain, that I wasn't going to win. That he was becoming too fast, and that this was not just Pablo from his early days. This was a new and improved Pablo, and Pablo was going to swim incredibly fast.
Like a brand new person.
Brand new person, and I watched him. There was a moment at the training camp when we were shaving down, and I walked into the bathroom, and he was shaving down, and he looked up and he said something to me, and I can't share with you what he said. It was not mean. It was not that. It was just so out of character for him. But he said something to me, and he said what he said to me, and it was just guy talk. And then but what the subtext of what he was saying was, "You're done. I'm going to kick your butt." I don't care what anybody says. That's what he meant. It intimidated me to my core. He was there to win. And so I had an objective, and my objective back then was to slow him down. And I jump start. You could false start twice. And if you would do 2 false starts, the third one, everyone's locked to the block. So the third one, you get disqualified. So I jumped twice at the Olympic Games in '92.
You jumped twice.
I jumped twice.
So
there goes Mel. Take your mark. There goes Mel. And so glued everyone at the blocks. And what I was doing is I was trying to slow Pablo down because I really had no shot at medaling. And frankly, it was, I don't think it was the most sportsmanlike thing to do because Pablo was I think he was a 53.01. I have to go back and look at the times, but I think he would have been a 52 mid, 52.6. I mean, it really slowed the heat down, but it didn't do me any good. I got 5th place, and I felt terrible about it forever. I felt guilty. And it wasn't until the 2008 Olympic Games in Omaha, 2008 Olympic trials in Omaha, that my wife was at a bar and Pablo was there, and she was having a beer with Pablo, and she told him how I feel. And he looked at me and he goes, Mel, it's okay. I knew you were going to jump twice. So I held on to this guilt for 16 years.
And he already knew.
he goes, Mel, I knew you were going to jump twice. I was prepared. So he knew what I was going to do, and he just used it as part of his strategy. But yes, much more of a gentleman than I am. And in terms of just talent, extraordinary talent. One of the greatest Olympic stories in swimming to make the Olympic team, be an Olympic champion, and miss it in '88 and then come back and win in '92.
Yeah, that sounds something that you could write a movie after.
Yeah, but so, I don't want to write a movie where I'm the bad guy. Maybe like this movie. Maybe this movie will be written one day.
So, going off of movies, you swam the 91, 92 Olympics, and you won again in an Olympic record time, but just underneath your world record time.
Correct.
Then, I'm not sure, how long did you swim after that?
I swam until 1996. So what I did was after 92, I spent 18 months in New York City at an apartment on 34th and Park, Midtown, and I spent a year and a half trying to launch a pro swimming event, which at the time was very unusual. And
similar to the Pro Swim Series, or?
No, well, we're in the midst of this international swimming league trying to get launched, and there's a lot of pushback from the governing bodies, FINA, and everyone has always wanted to create or reimagine swimming and put it in a professional light that would be something new and different and better. And I tried to do that for 18 months. And we ultimately, within 3 months, the concept evolved to being a 3-hour primetime event that would be globally, that would be distributed globally, and it would be swimming, track and field, and gymnastics. So once a year, you would have this mini Olympics during prime time, and for 3 hours, you would see the best people compete in the world, and it would be a teaser. So it would be this appetizer every year that would really prep you for the Olympic Games. And in concept, it was a great idea. And the networks liked it. And we needed to find a sponsor because it was a new concept. And we went to American Express, and American Express liked it because the Olympic sponsor was Visa. And we got pretty far down the road, and it fell apart. And when it fell apart, I was very disappointed. And I went back to the pool and started training. And I was older, and I enjoyed it. It was fun. I trained at UCLA for about a year under this coach by the name of Ron Balatori Sticks. And I did a movie. I was in a movie with Dolph Lundgren. I was on 2 episodes of Baywatch. So while I'm swimming, I'm like I would go out and I would audition for stuff, and then I actually started getting things on camera, and that was kind of fun. And I spent a lot of time. I became friends with a lot of writers because I had been writing in college. I'd always loved movies, and that was the beginning of a time where I was just exploring some things. And my swimming was I was doing it at about 70%. And by the time I rolled into 1995, 96, I really drilled down and got serious, and I had a lot of success. By 1996, I had 14 national championships in the 200 butterfly, which is the most in history for the United States. Michael Phelps has 13, and it's like the only record I have left. So I was very, very confident going into the 1996 Olympic trials, and I went to trials and I didn't fully rest. I was sort of I didn't fully back off thinking I had this because I really had never been challenged. Mm-hmm. And I got third. And so I missed the Olympic team. We got third place. And I remember thinking, wow, I should really be upset about this. But it's kind of hard to be upset when you're an Olympic champion. You're like, but I remember thinking, wow, I've had the full experience. I've gone to the Olympic Games and swum poorly. I've gone to the Olympic Games and swum well and won. And now I know what it's like to be third place, knocked off the Olympic team. And that was it was a weird feeling.
Full circle.
Full circle. It was, and it was depressing. It was, it was a letdown. And but it was also some relief because I was tired. I'd been working so hard for so long. Within 2 weeks, ESPN hired me as an analyst. So within 2 weeks, I was working for ESPN. And I went to the Olympic Games, and I was driven there. And, I'd show up and recap the races for 10 minutes and go to dinner and hang out with friends. And I was thinking to myself, I kind of like this.
So it was the beginning of a different era for you.
My opinion is if I had hit my taper well, I would have medaled. I don't know if I'd have won in 96. I don't know if I had enough background, enough base. Mm-hmm. But so I swam until 96. And so I have the full experience. I know what it feels like. I have the full experience of a swimmer from learning to swim to the full experience of an Olympian, the highs and the lows.
And really quick, a word from our sponsor, mentormatched.ca. Mentor Matched is an interactive online platform designed to help emerging athletes to learn from high-performance coaches and athlete mentors. If you go to their website and use the code PODCAST, you can get $10 off your purchase. Thank you, and let's get back to the podcast.
So you started writing, I guess, at the end of the 96 Olympics. You became an analyst for ESPN, and then you're acting in movies. You've been in Baywatch, and you were a screenwriter at that point, correct?
I had a friend who was a successful screenwriter, and he knew that I had been writing, and he said, "You know what? Your life story is extraordinary, and what you're talking about, we're talking about real chlorinated." Focused swim, but it's the story, it's my backstory, it's family, it's what happened to me between the ages of 5 and 15 that are really, it's like when people hear it, they can't process it. It's so unusual. And so he knew that was very marketable, and he said, look, you need to go to the page on that, and if you want, I'll do it with you, and if we go out with it, it'll sell. And I'm like, I don't think so. And he's like, it will. So we went to the market with it on a Monday, and by Monday night, studios started bidding on it. And almost every studio in Hollywood bid on my life story and kept bidding the number up until it closed on Friday. And it came down to 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers. And I remember when 20th Century Fox, the hard drama division was Fox 2000. They got it, and when they got it, I remember the EVP at Warner Brothers saying, "Neither of you will ever work for us, ever." It was very scary, negative. Then it sold. It sold for almost $1 million, and we went into development on it, and we were in development on that story for nearly 3 years. And most of Hollywood doesn't, they buy a lot of movies and they never make them. And we nearly had a green light with the director from this movie called Children of a Lesser God. Which is an Academy Award nominated film. And so it almost had a green light. It almost went, and it was sort of this touch and go thing for years. And it went so long. At a certain point, I requested my rights back from Fox because I wanted to write the book. I wanted to have control of it, and they gave me the rights back. So I was paid for it, and they gave me the rights to my story back. I started booking assignments for other companies. I became a gun for hire. I was just a development writer. I'm in the Writers Guild. I'm in the Writers Guild today, Writers Guild of America. But yeah, no, I made my livelihood as a development writer, meaning I'd fix things. And but most of what I did was write. I wrote for movies that were produced outside of the United States, and I wrote them under my wife's name. No, you do. It's a crazy world because you have a quote, you're in the guild, and you sit on your quote because if you write below your quote, you can't do it because it's a union. So I was a scab. I would write under a pen name, and I'd write a movie. I'd write a 2-hour movie in less than 10 days and get paid $10,000.
And it would be under your wife's name?
Yeah, T.M. Van Ostrand.
So if you go look into that, she's going to be a writer for a few movies.
We writer for a few movies, a lot of bad science fiction. But
is there anything that you're most proud of that you've that's been out there and that you worked on?
In terms of writing, the best draft I ever had was I was hired to write Phantom. Remember the Phantom, the comic book? It's the first comic book.
No.
Okay, the Phantom is the first comic book. It's the first comic book hero. So there was a movie in 1997 that was not. It didn't do well. It only did $17 million domestic in the United States, and it was Billy Zane in purple tights. And they knew that it was done wrong. It was dated. It wasn't a good comic book movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I had written a period piece about the Magna Carta, and 1215. Written, and it's a very dark movie, and this writer, the head of this company he was the head of Legendary for a long time, the chief creative officer, but he wasn't there at the time. He was with another financier. He came to me and he said, "This script is amazing. I want you to do this for a comic book movie, and I want you to do it for Phantom." And he goes, "Don't listen to anybody. You're the money. This is what you do. Write the same movie. And I want it to be dark. I want you to go as far as you can." So I wrote a very, very dark film. And that movie went out to every A-list director, and they're like, "This is a great movie." But it was too close to, that was out by 2004. And every single director said, "Billy Zane movie is only 1997. There hasn't been enough time." But I'm most proudest of that piece because if you watch Batman Year One and you read my script, you would be like, you would not believe that this script was written years before Batman Year One. So when that movie did not get a green light, I looked at my wife and I'm like, I'm very unhappy. I'm being paid well. I'm making money. They're paying me. I'm being paid to be a writer. I'm being paid to be an artist. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it was I was sitting in my underwear churning 1,000 pages a year in this tiny little apartment office in Los Angeles, and I was kind of losing my connection to life. And I said, I got to get back to my family. And I said, maybe I could do something in swimming. And she's like, maybe you should. And she was very encouraging. And I went to USA Swimming, and I started working with USA Swimming in their marketing department. I was helping there. They had a website that I worked with that is no longer around. And I started working with the foundation, the USA Swimming Foundation. And so I worked across a lot of different departments, but they basically gave me a job. And it was contract work, but it was enough for me to step away from writing. And once I started smelling chlorine again, and once I felt like I could be kind of creative in swimming, I was like, I want to stay. This is my family. And long story short, USA Swimming had a site called Swim Network. Do you remember Swim Network?
No.
Yeah, USA Swimming tried to be a news site, and they were good at it, and they did a good job.
Swim Network was their kind of.
It was their iteration of a news site, and it was and I loved working for them. I wasn't in charge. The guy who was in charge is an Olympic peer. His name's Scott Goldblatt, and Scott Goldblatt is a super smart guy. He was a great blogger, and he was a great editor, and he was a great managing editor. And the long story short is, it didn't make it. A governing body probably shouldn't be in the news business. And so no fault to Scott, no fault to USA Swimming, no fault to anybody involved. It just wasn't the right thing. They couldn't do what they needed to do. And when that ended, I remember my wife was laying in bed with me. She's like, and I'm like, I want to start a swimwear company, or I want to go into team management software, or I want to go into, I was looking at different areas in the swim market.
Just to stay, keep the chlorine.
So I could stay connected to swimming. So I wanted to start a business in swimming, and I wanted to stay with my people. I want to be with my tribe, right? Mm-hmm. And she basically told me, you don't have the sophistication or skill set to launch a swimwear company. You have no experience, and you know nothing about software. You're a salesman. You can write, you can produce video, and so sort of in that time period, we launched a production company that serviced the Olympic market. So we were producing commercials for companies that advertised in the Olympic space, and most of the commercials were for the web. We cut stuff for television that did run on TV, 30-second spots, and we produced 3 television shows that ended up being domestic. We syndicated them domestically in the United States to 90 million households, and to another 40 million internationally on ESPN International. So we produced 30-minute shows that were swim meets, and so we did a lot of this stuff. My wife's like, you can do this, but you need to compete with Swimming World. Swimming World is they're just a little bit old, and they're a little bit out of fashion, and someone needs to fill this space. And I'm like, they've been around since 1952. Nobody can beat Swimming World. Mm-hmm. I got their magazines downstairs in my garage.
I remember before SwimSwam, when I was way younger, like I used to get the Swimming World magazines. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like that was just, the source of swimming information at the time.
Oh, I was in the cover. I was in Swimming World magazine when I was 10. I was in the cover 3 separate times. To me, it was the resource for everything. So I had a great respect and love for Swimming World. I even worked for Swimming World a little bit. I did some reporting for them, but it was. So long story short, she said, "No, this is what we need to do," and I didn't want to. The biggest reason, all cards on the table. I'm like, the job is too hard. I understood what it was, and it doesn't pay enough. It's too hard. And she basically said, but this is the skill set that you have, and this is where you can be successful. And she spent almost 18 months convincing me. And finally, I was like, we're doing this. Fine. You're right. We're going to.
So you didn't want to jump into, the Swim News Network right away. It took a while.
No. It had been a discussion on and off for 3 years. But she didn't start, it took about 18 months of her really pushing it. And a confluence of a lot of things coming together. And finally, I'm like, you know what, you're right. This is what should be done. And we sat down. I remember us sitting down on the couch, and she had a pen and paper in hand, and she's like, let's buy swim.com. And I'm like, I know who owns it. So I called them up, and I'm like, what would it cost? And they wanted over $250,000 for it. And I went, that's too much money. I really want that URL, but I'm not going to pay that much money. Mm-hmm. And she's like, yeah. What can we do? And she goes, how about this? SwimSwam.com. You're either a swimmer or a swammer. And my wife's not a swimmer. She never swam. She's like, and I'm like, SwimSwam sounds weird. And like, I like it. It sounds webby. And I said, so let's write that down at the top of the list. So we wrote it down. And then we went through 500 URLs. And Well, I think we went back and forth. We came back to the couch each night for about 3 days, and we just, at the end of the third day, it was like SwimSwam.com. You're either a swimmer or you're a swimmer.
Mm-hmm.
And within 2.5, 3 months, we had Braden Keith came in as the writer. He'd been a great blogger with the Swimmer Circle. Garrett McCaffrey had been very successful with flow swimming when Flow was very, very young. Then he worked at Swimming World and wasn't happy with Swimming World, so he left there. But he really had a lot of respect. He was just the best at what he did. And we had a designer, Davis Woolley, out of Canada, who was who had done a great job developing a lot of sites, and he had an understanding of swimming. And my wife's like, look, here's the legal, here's everything. This is the way we'll set it up financially. So she did. She had started 2 other businesses, so she knew exactly how to launch us. And we had partners through our commercial production company. So we launched with advertisers, and we launched in the spring of 2012.
And then
we launched in the spring.
Short years, and now you guys are the #1 swimming source of information. Like I can't imagine getting swimming information from any place else right now.
Well, I've never said this publicly, and I think after 7 years, 6 years, almost 7 years, I could say this. We had a lot of things in place, and there was a huge demand for a second source. There shouldn't be, there should be other sources of news.
Mm-hmm.
So we launched, and things went well. It was well received, and we were watching the needle on traffic slowly climb up. And 2.5 months later was U.S. Olympic trials, and it's 2012. Michael Phelps is competing, and Brent Rudemiller, who was the CEO, president of Swimming World, was on deck with me, and he's like, I'm going to a paid model. You can, if you, and you would go to swimming. So like, I remember going, what? You have to pay for news? And I remember going to my computer and like loading Swimming World, and it came up that you had to pay $3.95 a month to read Swimming World. And then I remember jumping over to SwimSwam, and I watched our traffic needle go straight up.
Wow. Yeah. I can imagine, because people don't want to pay for news. So that was probably a big change in traffic for you guys.
The change in traffic was extraordinarily immediate, and we took off like a rocket. So if you didn't know who we were, suddenly, over the 8 days of Olympic trials, you found out who SwimSwam was, and that you had an alternate source of news if you wanted it. He took off the paid option after trials, and then I think he did it again at the Olympics, and our traffic blew up again and went way high. And then he kind of backed off the paid model. It was sort of like you could read a few articles for no cost, and then you'd have to pay. So it's sort of like a governor, it's like. Mm-hmm. And then he did it again in the spring of 2013 for NC2As. And I remember after that, I'm like, I can't believe they do this again. Here's the thing, it's a different business model. Mm-hmm. And maybe that business model works, and they're still a business, and they're now with International Swimming Hall of Fame. So they have different streams of revenue, but it's just not a business model that made sense to me, because I wanted to reach swimmers. But they never really recovered after the spring of 13. After the spring of 13, it was over.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely played in your guys' favor as SwimSwam as a company. When your competitor, there's not many news sources for swimming out there, and your competitor is making it pretty difficult to access news to swimming, you obviously find an alternative. Here's the thing. I don't have the benefit of looking into his business model and understanding why he did that, because your objective as a business owner is to generate a profit. And I think it was very profitable for them to do what they did. And they, frankly, if you look at the way they run their business, Swimming World has always managed to make money and to service partners and to generate, whether it's subscription model or whether it's the International Swimming Hall of Fame, whatever it's been. Brent has been a great manager in terms of generating a profit. He knows how to make money.
So it's just not, philosophically, it's not something that we wanted to do, because our objective is a funny business model. SwimSwam's objective is this: serve the market with news and try to learn how big the actual market is. How large is our market?
Mm-hmm.
Is it 8 million people a month? Is it, could it be 20 million a month? I want to know how big the audience is, because that's the burning question I had after 1992. I wanted to do a television show in prime time. I wanted swimming to be globally seen. I wanted to have the largest audience possible because I love swimming. And it's not a clean mission statement or business model, but it does drive us. It drives.
That's actually really interesting. I guess your guys' goal is to figure out, how many people are out there that want to see swimming on a regular basis. Do you ever think that there's going to be, or something that you guys are going to develop on, or something that there's going to be in the future, that prime time slot?
I currently International Swimming League is trying to launch, and that's
the Energy, right?
Energy for Swim 2018. And FINA is trying to get them to work within their ecosystem, and they're trying to be a private enterprise. So it's like, will they be a private enterprise, or will they actually work with FINA? And it's kind of a question. And FINA is making it bureaucratically difficult for the International Swimming League to work with them. It's a frothy, creative environment, and we don't really know what's going to happen. But I actually think the International Swimming League has a realistic shot. They're financed. They have a realistic shot of giving it a go. And I do think that if they enter the market and they're able to have enough oxygen to breathe for 3 years, I think that you're going to see we're going to see different television rights and different television distribution options for swim. And even if they are not successful, I think it's going to push FINA to be a better governing body, and even the national governing bodies, the NGBs. We already have seen this evidence. International Swimming League enters the market with Energy for Swim 2018, which is really the second event. They had one in 2017. FINA, independent of them, they've now doubled the prize money for the short course world championships.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that would have happened if ISL wasn't in the mix. So they're trying to create a more attractive model for athletes. And I think that they were spurred on by ISL, International Swim League.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't confirm that.
Just speculation.
It's speculation, but it appears that way. And so, yes, we're in an unusual time, and I think that swimming could really take off in the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're seeing more and more swimmers go pro, and the articles that I see on SwimSwam and throughout the swimming world is that, there's more competitions that swimmers are going to. Sarah Stordstrom and Katinka Hozu and all these names that are, now competing at the FINA World Cup Series because, they can make a living off of it. Not, I guess.
No. You can, if you were an elite athlete, you're top 10 in the world. You can, if you're top 20 in the world, you can be top 30 in the world. You can make a living swimming, and you can do it if you're not getting it through prize money. You can get it through clinics, and you can get it through having a stable of people, of companies that you work with. Some athletes don't have multi-million-dollar contracts with swimwear companies, but they might have 5 partnerships across 5 smaller companies and these 5 smaller companies need them, and they are great service. They have they need you're not the top in the world, but you have a pretty good social following, and you conceivably can final at the Olympic Games. You're within striking distance. Yeah, it matters. And these athletes are making a living.
And that concludes the first episode of Question 4. If you want to learn more on Mel or anything that he does, you can check out his bio on SwimSwam.com or check out his website, SwimSwam.com. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. And if you get a chance, you can go like our Facebook page. at question 4. That's all. Thank you very much.